Now we start with questions to Prime Minister. Gareth Davis.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will have read the statement today from my honourable friend, the member for Bridgend. And I know that the House stands with you and will give you the support that you need to live freely as yourself. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Donna Ockenden and her whole team for the compassionate approach she's taken throughout this distressing review of maternity care at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospitals NHS Trust. Every woman giving birth has the right to a safe birth, and my heart, therefore, goes out to the families for the distress and suffering that they've endured. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will be making an oral statement this afternoon setting out the government's response. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Gareth Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While our focus is rightly on Ukraine, the Prime Minister will be aware of the great concern many people have across the Baltic states. So can he outline the role the Joint Expeditionary Force can play in countering Russian aggression and improving defensive posture for our allies in the Baltics?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and the Joint Expeditionary Force, or the JEF, is an increasingly important grouping of the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries, the Dutch and ourselves, who are committed to working together in an active way to counter Russian aggression and to support our Ukrainian friends. And we had a very successful meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we'll have further such meetings in the course of the next few weeks.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by joining the Prime Minister in his remarks in relation to the honourable member for Bridgend? Does the Prime Minister still think that he and the Chancellor are tax-cutting Conservatives?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly do, because this is the government that has just introduced not only the biggest cut in fuel duty ever, but the biggest cut in tax for working people in the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker. 70% of the population paying national insurance contribution will have a substantial tax cut as a result of what the Chancellor did. And if you take together, they don't like it, Mr. Speaker, it's true. They always put up taxes. That's why we cut taxes. They love it. They love putting up taxes. But if you take together what we're doing with income tax and national insurance, it's the biggest tax cut proposed by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, for 25 years.
Keir Starmer.
Cut the nonsense and treat the British people with a bit of respect. Let me take him through this slowly. 15 tax rises, the highest tax burden for 70 years. For every £6 they're taking in tax rises, they're only handing £1 back. Prime Minister, is that cutting taxes or is that raising taxes?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know where he's been for the last 2 years, but even by the standards of yes, he has. Even by the standards of Captain Hindsight, Mr. Speaker, to obliterate the biggest pandemic for the last century from his memory, to obliterate the $408 billion that we've had to spend to look after people up and down the country is quite extraordinary. And this is a government that is getting on with reducing the tax burden wherever we can. What we are doing, Mr. Speaker, there's one measure I think he should be supporting, and that's the health and care levy, Mr. Speaker, to fund our NHS. That's the one they oppose, Mr. Speaker. Every other tax rise, they're all in favour of.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I can only hope that his police questionnaire was a bit more convincing than that. This year, British people face the worst fall in living standards on record. While they're counting every penny, the Prime Minister is hitting them with higher taxes. But in 2024, when there just so happens to be a general election, they will introduce a small tax cut. That's not taking difficult decisions. It's putting the Tory re-election campaign over and above helping people pay their bills. How did he find a Chancellor as utterly cynical as he is?
Prime Minister.
What we have, Mr. Speaker, is a Chancellor who took the tough decisions to look after the UK economy throughout the pandemic, who protected people up and down the land with £408 billion worth of support, Mr. Speaker. And by the way, if we listen to them, if we listen to Captain, this is the truth. If we listen to Captain Hindsight, we would not have come out of lockdown in July last year, Mr. Speaker. We would have stayed in lockdown over Christmas and New Year, Mr. Speaker, with the result that the UK economy would not be growing in the way that it is, and so we would not be able to make the investments that we now are. And under Labour, we would have to tax more and borrow more, and they cannot be trusted, Mr. Speaker, with the economy.
Keir Starmer.
The tough decisions. Give me a break. We know, Mr. Speaker, we know who those two always ask to pay. Income stealth tax, a tax on working people. Tuition fee raid, a tax on working people. National insurance hike, a tax on working people. All while oil and gas companies see unexpected bumper profits. A windfall tax would raise billions and ease the burden on working people. Mr. Speaker, the former CEO of BP, Lord John Brown, says a windfall tax is justifiable. The current CEO says they have, in his words, more cash than they know what to do with. Why is the Prime Minister more interested in shielding oil and gas profits than supporting working people?
Mr. Speaker, it's a classic example of what Labour has got wrong in their period in office. The oil and gas companies are now investing £20 billion, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that we have long-term energy supplies. And I remember the 1997 Labour manifesto actually said that there was no economic case for more nuclear power. We are now having to make good the historic mistakes of the Labour Party by investing in our long-term energy supply. That is what we're doing. Everything that they are proposing would mean deterring investment, meaning higher prices for consumers and households up and down the land being worse off.
Keir Starmer.
Speaker, there we have it. They're the party of excess oil and gas profits. We're the party of working people. Mr. Speaker, talking of parties, Prime Minister, he told the House no rules were broken in Downing Street during lockdown. The police have now concluded there was widespread criminality. The Ministerial Code says that ministers who knowingly mislead the House should resign. Why is he still here?
Hang on a minute. He's just changed his position. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we do at least expect some consistency from this human weather vane. It was only a week or so ago where he was saying that I shouldn't resign. He's got to make what is his position, Mr. Speaker? The investigators must get on with their job. But in the meantime, In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we are going to get on with our job. And what we are focusing on is tackling the cost of living, helping people through the spike in fuel prices, the 9.1 billion that the Chancellor has set out, but also, Mr. Speaker, doing the long. I've mentioned nuclear power. I've mentioned tackling our energy supplies, which Labour totally failed to deal with. What we're also doing, far more important perhaps even than that, Mr. Speaker, we're tackling illiteracy and innumeracy in our schools. And I think we're investing billions in tutoring, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're focusing on, and I think that's what the people of this country want us to focus on.
Keir Starmer.
Look, there are only two possible explanations. Either he's trashing the ministerial code, or he's claiming he was repeatedly lied to by his own advisers and that he didn't know what was going on in his own house and his own office. Come off it. He really does think that it's one rule for him and another rule for everyone else. That he can pass off criminality in his office and ask others to follow the law. That he can keep raising taxes and call himself a tax cutter. That he can hike tax during a cost of living crisis and get credit for giving a bit back just before an election. When is he going to stop taking the British public for fools?
Mr. Speaker, this is the leader of the opposition who would have kept this country in lockdown and made it absolutely impossible. He has zero consistency on any issue, Mr. Speaker. But one thing we know about is he would like to take us back into the EU and take us back into lockdown if he possibly could. Thanks to what this government has done, we have unemployment back down to the levels it was before the pandemic. The economy bigger than it was. We have record vacancies, Mr. Speaker. The difference between them and us is they want to keep people, Mr. Speaker, they want to keep people on benefits. We want to help people into work. And that's what we're doing in record numbers. They want to raise taxes. We want to cut taxes. And that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. And we're tackling illiteracy. They didn't give a damn, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on with making this country the best place to invest. Last time I updated the House, Mr. Speaker, on the number of unicorns that we had of unicorns in this country. That's tech countries worth more than $1 billion, Mr. Speaker. I said we had 100. I can inform you now, Mr. Speaker, that we now have 120. They don't want to hear it, but let me tell you, that's more than France, that's more than Germany, that's more than Israel, it's more than France, Germany, Israel combined, Mr. Speaker. That's what's happening under this government. That's what's happening because of the tough decisions we've taken. We take the tough decisions, we deliver, they play politics, Mr. Speaker.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government's work connecting rural areas like Brecon and Radnorshire to superfast broadband is going to come a lot harder tomorrow when the Welsh Government withdraws its matched funding for the scheme, forcing the cost for installation back onto homes and businesses in my constituency. Welsh Labour's decision means that my constituents will lose out as local authorities in England continue to fund the scheme. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that broadband is critical for the growth of the rural economy? And will he double his government's efforts to connect my constituents despite Welsh Labour letting us down?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and we're spending £69 million already to support rollout of superfast broadband in Wales, and I wish that the Welsh Government had not withdrawn its broadband scheme, but we will do our best, Mr. Speaker, to make up the difference as fast as possible.
We now come to the SNP leader, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's good to see the member for Bridgend in the chamber this afternoon. I commend him for his statement earlier today. Mr. Speaker, last night, millions of families will have been desperately trying to figure out how they will possibly afford the £700 energy price hike that will hit them this Friday. Mr. Speaker, at the very same time, Tory MPs were gathering across the street for a champagne bash in the Park Plaza. We all know that the Tories partied during lockdown and now they're...
Mr. Fabricant, Easter is upon us. I don't need you to ruin your Easter. So let's hear, all of you, SNP leader Ian Blackford.
can shout and scream when we're raising the Tory cost of living crisis, Mr. Speaker, because we all know that the Tories partied during lockdown, and now they're partying through the cost of living emergency. Last week, the Chancellor got it badly wrong with the spring statement, and ever since, the Prime Minister has been busy briefing against him, saying that more needs to be done. For once, I agree with the Prime Minister. So, if the Prime Minister really believes that more needs to be done, can he tell us exactly what he will order his Chancellor to do to help the millions of families who are facing a £700 price hike this Friday?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and I think he's in error in what he says about events last night, but he is, like me, a living testament to the benefits of moderation in all things, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure him that we are getting that this week, for instance, to get to his point, what's happening actually is that the living wage is going up again by record amounts, and thanks to what the Chancellor has done, we are putting £9.1 billion into helping people up and down the country. And what I might respectfully suggest is actually, I think the Scottish Nationalist government, with whom, as I say, we work increasingly well, I think the thing they could focus on for the long-term prosperity of Scotland is the educational system, where I'm sad to see Scotland's once glorious record falling behind.
Ian Blackford.
What a load of absolute baloney. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is dangerously out of touch. Food banks are warning that people are having to choose their food based on whether they can afford the gas to boil it. Families are having to choose what rooms to heat or whether they can turn on the heating at all. Some in the Tory cabinet clearly believe that better weather means that they can happily sit on their hands and do nothing till next winter. They obviously don't get or don't care that in many parts of Scotland the weather will barely reach above freezing over the next week. The Chancellor thinks his £200 loan, which is forcing people into energy debt, is somehow a solution, but it clearly isn't. So before the Prime Minister and his Chancellor go off on their Easter holidays, will they at very least turn this loan into a grant and finally put some cash into people's pockets when they need it right now?
Prime Minister.
I thank him, but of course we are doing everything that we can. The 9.1 billion, the cold weather payments, and he's right to draw attention to the problem, Mr. Speaker. And we are making huge investments in supporting people right now, and another £1 billion, by the way, through the Household Support Fund to help vulnerable families. But Mr. Speaker, when he talks about the cost of energy in Scotland, how absolutely preposterous that the Scottish Nationalist Party should still be opposed to the use of any of our native hydrocarbons in this country, with the result that we actually have to that the Europeans are importing oil and gas from Putin's Russia, Mr. Speaker. It's totally absurd. It's true.
Just for the record, it's National Party. Let's go to Mark Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the publication of the school's white paper, one of my most important campaigns is to secure provision of quality post-16 education within the Bolsover constituency, where there is currently none. Young people in my constituency have to travel long distances at considerable cost to access their education. Will my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss how we can right this wrong for the young people of the Bolsover constituency and give them the education that they deserve?
Prime Minister.
Yes. I thank him very much, and he's a great champion for Bolsover and for his constituents. Free and subsidised travel is provided to Bolsover students travelling so far to two of the three excellent colleges that are going to be offering T-levels from 2023. But I will make sure that he gets a meeting with my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, to discuss further what we can do.
And David.
During the Second World War, my grandmother, like countless other people across our country, opened her home to evacuees, including 2 German Jewish boys. Over 70 years later, the British people want to shelter desperate refugees again. 2 weeks ago, I was speaking to refugee families on the Ukrainian-Polish border at Medyka. Some desperately wanted to come to our country. One elderly couple told me, however, they'd been told that it's just too complicated. Now the government's own figures say the same. Paperwork is being put ahead of people. Mr. Speaker, when wealthy businessmen from over 50 countries can come to the UK visa-free, why does the Prime Minister insist that a traumatised Ukrainian mother and child must first fill out a visa form?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I'm thanking very much, and he's right about the generosity of his country, and he's right to draw attention to his own family's generosity in this matter. Everybody, I think, is pulling together. The number of people who have come forward to offer their homes is incredible. But I really don't think that he should deprecate what the UK is offering. We've already given 25,000 people have already got visas, Mr. Speaker. We are processing 1,000 a day, and there is no limit, there is no upper limit to the number that we can take. And this is a country that has already been the most generous in taking people from Afghanistan, the 15,000 under Operation Pitting, 104,000 applications from the Hong Kong Chinese. This is a country that is overwhelmingly generous to people coming in fear of their lives from... Yes, it is, Mr. Speaker, and so is this government.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anybody involved in partnering operations over the last 10 or 20 years can fail to be humbled by the extraordinary courage and commitment of the Ukrainian people in defending their country, aided and abetted by the lethal aid from this country, of which they're all appreciative of this government and this Prime Minister being first out the door to deliver that. But would the Prime Minister agree with me that whilst others may now begin to tire, now is actually the time to double down on the aid that we give to Ukraine, that actually we might end up breaking a pretty poor Russian army and bring peace to that part of the world whilst consigning the likes of Vladimir Putin to the dustbin of history where he belongs?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that is absolutely right. Thank him very much. I thank him for his own bravery in going to see for himself only the other day. But, Mr. Speaker, yes, it is right that we should double down on military defensive support in the way that we are. And by the way, can anybody imagine a Labour government, eight of whose front bench voted to get rid of our nuclear deterrent? Can you imagine? Yes, they did. Can you imagine recently? Can you imagine them doing the same? We will go on with that, Mr. Speaker. But what we will also do, and I hope we have the support of the opposition in this, is make sure that there is no backsliding on sanctions by any of our friends and partners around the world. In fact, we need now to ratchet up the economic pressure on Vladimir Putin, and it is certainly inconceivable that any sanctions could be taken off simply because there is a ceasefire, Mr. Speaker. That would be absolutely unthinkable, in my view.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Households are experiencing soaring energy costs. We're in the middle of a global climate emergency. Against this backdrop, Norway can feed energy into our national grid at a cost of £1.36 per megawatt hour. France pays 17 pence per megawatt hour. Germany, the Netherlands and Luxembourg pay nothing to feed into our group. Can the Prime Minister then explain why Scotland's renewable sector has been punished with grid connection charges of £7.36 per megawatt hour?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland's renewable sector is leading the world, and I'm grateful to the Scottish Government for all the help and support that they are giving in developing that incredible resource in the North Sea. I think that there is also a role, by the way, for hydrocarbons as we transition, Mr. Speaker. But what we need to do is make sure that we have a grid. That enables us to take that electricity onshore and transmit it around the country. And that is what I will be setting out in the British Energy Security Strategy, Mr. Speaker. That is the investment, the long-term investment that this country needs, and which the parties opposite completely failed to address.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, following a huge resident and parish council-led campaign, the planning application for a new mega prison in my constituency was refused. But would my right honourable friend agree that with the proposals for that site being very close to where HS2 and East West Rail cross, this is a matter of fairness whereby communities already suffering at the hands of the construction of big state infrastructure should not be asked to take more? And will he instruct the Ministry of Justice not to appeal this planning decision?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, who's a doughty campaigner for his constituency. He's made an important point about a planning matter about which I don't think I should really comment, but I'm sure that the relevant ministers will have heard him loud and clear.
Eric Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the government losing an estimated £4 billion to fraud in the furlough scheme, surely the Prime Minister should have tackled that fraud, especially when, in his own party in North Tyneside, furlough was claimed for a member of party staff, even though he continued to work.
Prime Minister.
If she's really saying, Mr. Speaker, that we should not have rolled out the furlough scheme at the speed that we did, then I think everybody in this country understands that it was a heroic thing to do. And I remember 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, they were yammering and clamouring for us to go faster. And we did, Mr. Speaker. We produced a fantastic scheme. And yes, fraudsters will be hunted down. We put another 100 million into tracking down fraud in this country. £23 billion a year were lost under Labour in fraud.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I was delighted to learn this week that 37 of the 39 state schools in Bracknell constituency are now graded good or outstanding. Will the Prime Minister join with me in thanking our fantastic teachers, staff, governors and pupils? And does he agree that the new Education White Paper offers a blueprint for our schools that we can all be proud of?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a fantastic white paper.
Evans.
Over 2 million tonnes of edible food is wasted on farms and factories every year, and funding was introduced in 2019 to cover the costs of getting food to charities to reach those in need. However, the Prime Minister will know his government have now cut that critical funding to zero. Mr. Speaker, funding for food waste diversion helps support community projects like, for example, Three Hills Community Supermarket in Glasgow. So can the Prime Minister explain why he's ignoring calls from Feeding Britain, Good Food Scotland and FareShare to continue this worthwhile initiative and instead cutting off a lifeline to those struggling with the cost of living crisis?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much. I think he's referring to the strategy that we have for food waste. As far as I know, we continue to support it, but I will be happy to update him by letter.
Lucy Allen.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his earlier remarks concerning the Donna Ockenden report into avoidable maternity deaths and injuries at the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust. The report makes for devastating reading, the more so because women's voices were ignored. Absolutely. My constituent Hayley Matthews begged staff for a C-section throughout her 36-hour labour, but was forced into a natural birth. Her son Jack arrived blue and floppy, and within hours of his birth he tragically died. Will the Prime Minister join me in offering heartfelt sympathies to all the families affected, and also grateful thanks to the 1,862 women who shared their experiences with the Ockenden Review to ensure that maternity care is safer, kinder and more compassionate for the women that come after them?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I think everybody will thank the women concerned for taking up the issue in the way that that they have, and will extend our heartfelt sympathies to the victims and their families for what they've suffered. It is very important that people get the answers that they deserve, Mr. Speaker, but also that we have the right approach to to this issue in the future. And that's why we're investing very substantially in maternity services and also, of course, very substantially in midwives and in our NHS altogether.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Prime Minister, every day I hear from more and more of my Rotherham constituents who are struggling to put food on the table, to keep their lights on, to fuel their cars. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates the government's measures will only offset falling living standards by a third. This is the biggest financial squeeze since the 1950s. Prime Minister, don't blame Ukraine, don't blame COVID. This is down to your government's policies and your political choices. Sleep at night.
Prime Minister.
Well, I do agree that people are facing a very tough time at the moment, and we've got to do everything that we. I don't agree with her analysis, but I think that the causes are certainly to do with the inflationary impact of the world coming out of COVID, and the energy price spike is at the root of it. And what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is to help people with a universal credit, which we've lifted by £1,000, help people with the living wage, which is going up now by a record amount, Mr. Speaker, and cutting taxes on working people in the way that we are. But of course we can't do everything, Mr. Speaker, right now. And what we will do is ensure that we have a stronger economic performance and we have people in work. And the most important thing is that we have people getting into work now in a way that wasn't possible, and certainly wouldn't have been possible if we'd stuck to the policies that were proposed by the Labour opposition. And that's why we have a strong economy, and that is the best recipe. Better to be off benefits and into work, and that's what we're doing.
Neil Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my earliest campaigns was to reopen Stafford's Shire Hall, so I'm delighted that this iconic building is finally set to reopen this summer. So can I thank the government for providing £1.6 million in funding to create a hub for small businesses in the Shire Hall. But can I also ask my honourable friend to help regenerate the rest of Stafford Town Centre and our high streets to help level up the West Midlands and support our local businesses?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her fantastic work to reopen Shire Hall. She's a passionate campaigner for Stafford, and Stafford was awarded over £14 million lately, Mr. Speaker, through the Future High Streets Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency has one of the highest rates of child poverty in the entire country, with too many already struggling between heating and eating. The government's recent real terms social security cut will now push even more families, children and pensioners into desperation. Does the Prime Minister agree that the biggest squeeze in household finances since records began does not come out of the blue, but is due to conservative economics and the notion that while some have the pleasure of partying, the rest of us should suffer?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, we're absolutely dedicated to levelling up across our entire country and making sure that we reduce poverty. And that's why I'm proud that there are now 500,000 fewer kids actually in workless households, 200,000 fewer kids, 200,000 fewer in poverty, Mr. Speaker, and 1.3 million fewer in absolute poverty. And the way we've done that, the way we've done that, Mr. Speaker, is by helping people into work. And we're going to go further, investing in more work coaches, massively increasing our training budget so that people get the skills that they need. That's our approach, Mr. Speaker, helping people by getting them into work.
Sir Robert Butland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's announcement by our serving United Kingdom judges of their withdrawal from the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal is now the right decision, and I support it, as does my right honourable friend. Does he agree with me that on this sad day for the people of Hong Kong, and at a time when the international rule of law is under unprecedented challenge, it is for us here in Britain to stand up for what is right, to be resolute in the face of tyranny, and to make sure that the international rules-based order is defended at every opportunity?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I know how passionately he's campaigned on this issue himself, and I can tell him that, and I want to thank the judges in Hong Kong's court for everything that they've been doing, but I think that they've evidently concluded that the constraints of the national security law make it impossible for them to continue to serve in the way that they would want. I appreciate and I understand their decision. It is vital that we all continue to make our points to the Chinese, as I did in my conversation with President Xi the other day, about freedom in Hong Kong and about the treatment of the Uyghurs, and we will continue to do that.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Gas and electric prices and bills are through the roof. The just about managing are no longer managing, coming to surgeries, queuing at food banks. Last week, the government had a golden opportunity to tackle this. Why the devil didn't they take that opportunity to do something and relieve the pressure on our constituents?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the pressure that people are under, but the best thing we can do, rather than endlessly taxing more and borrowing more, is make sure that we support people through this tough time, which we are, but also ensure that we have a strong and growing economy in which we get people into work. So we're cutting the cost of energy, but we're also taking the long-term decisions, which the party opposite failed to do, to invest in our energy for the future.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, today's updated government figures show that of 28,300 applications submitted under the sponsorship scheme by people displaced in Putin's war, just 2,700 have been processed. Could my right honourable friend please tell the House how many to date of those people have actually arrived in the United Kingdom? And will he give his support to my noble friend Lord Harrington to cut through the Home Office red tape, simplify the application process and get people into the country?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're processing 1,000 a day, and I think that the country, 25,000 visas have already been issued, as I just told the House, Mr. Speaker. Almost 200,000 families, homes have opened their arms to Ukrainians coming in fear of their lives, and there is no limit on the scheme, Mr. Speaker. I think we can be incredibly proud of what the UK is doing.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A cornerstone of the last Conservative manifesto was a guarantee that the basic state pension would rise by either 2.5%, the inflation rate, or earnings growth, whichever was highest. Instead, from April, the state pension will rise by less than half of the current inflation rate. How does the Prime Minister explain this abject betrayal of some of the most vulnerable people in our communities who are squeezed by rocketing energy and food prices on the one hand and the miserliness of this government on the other?
Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, what we've done is, through the triple lock, protected pensioners so that their incomes as a result of the triple lock are £720 higher than they would have been if we just relied on inflation. As it is, their incomes continue to increase with inflation, and they've gone up, Mr. Speaker, faster and further than those who are in work. We look after elderly people, and we always will.
John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the Foreign Secretary agreed that we needed to expand our soft power capabilities in these uncertain times, and yet the government is imminently about to make a funding decision that may see the closure of British Council country operations and a reduction in its international footprint. Will the Prime Minister now intervene to ensure this doesn't happen, given that I know he understands and appreciates the important work the Council does?
Prime Minister.
I'm very happy to meet my honourable friend on this issue, and he's campaigned on it many times. But I can tell him that the British Council, for which I have a huge regard, has received massive grant and indeed loans to allow them to continue their activities.
Matt Western.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You'll forgive me if I may start, but given the Prime Minister's preferences for both fancy castles and Peppa Pig, he's very welcome to come and visit Zog Playland at Warwick Castle this week.
In Warwick and Leamington, as across the country, cost of living crunch is really serious. Energy bills, as we've heard, looking to double by the end of this year. Yeah. Food up 10 to 15% by year end. Fuel already 22% up year on year. It must be hard for the Prime Minister to stay in touch with financial reality, given that donors and friends pay for flights and holidays and many of his bills. And we also have a $200 million man chancellor, a $200 million chancellor, who's so out of touch, he's contactless. Mr. Speaker, the public believes...
You will be sitting down, so please. I hope we've come to the end of the question. Prime Minister.
So out of touch is contactless. Mr. Speaker, the public believes the government...
Shut up and be quiet. Behave yourselves. I hope that's the end of the question. I think the Prime Minister's got the gist of it, because I certainly am. Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, much as I admire his style, I think it'd be better as a sort of a light essay in The Guardian. What we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is tackling the cost of living by dealing with the spike in energy prices and making sure that we take the right long-term decisions to take this country forward, which right decisions that party opposite completely shirked.
Leighton Saxby.
Speaker. And I welcome what this government is doing to help where it can with the cost of living crisis. Yeah. But in North Devon and across the South West, we have a housing crisis that needs urgent action. Will my right honourable friend meet with me to better understand the severity and complexity of our housing shortage and potential steps the government may take?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and she's right about the need to provide local homes for local people. And we totally understand that, and I'm very, and that's why we're building a record number of homes, by the way, Mr. Speaker, in spite of all the difficulties that we've faced, and that's why we've introduced higher rates of stamp duty on second homes, Mr. Speaker, remove the second homes discount, and we're using 11.5 billion to build 180,000 affordable homes across the country. It is always the Conservatives who build affordable homes. It's true, and it's Labour who talk about it.
Final question, Sir Olney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday, it emerged there'd been an oil spill in Beverley Brook, a river which flows through Richmond Park to the Thames. Black waste oil and iridescence can now be seen along 13 kilometres of the watercourse, posing a serious threat to the fish and local wildlife. The Environment Agency are investigating, but they are understaffed and underfunded, while also battling against water companies over sewage discharge. Will the government commit to strengthening the powers of the Office for Environmental Protection, as the Lib Dems tried to do through the Environment Bill, so that it is able to hold the government and other public authorities to account over environmental damage in the same way the European Commission was able to?
Prime Minister.
I know what's behind her question, Mr. Speaker. It's a desire to return to the jurisdiction of the European Union. What we want to do is make sure that we use our landmark Environment Bill to continue to improve the quality of our rivers, and that's what we're doing.
We'll just let the chamber clear before we start the statement.